This is not a new phenomenon, especially in India. Whenever there is some kind of a Hindu awakening, when I said Hindu awakening, it is not oppression, it is defense. Whenever there is some kind of a narrative which is posted anti Christian, there is some kind of a defense that comes in. The, the whole ecosystem of the minorities wakes up to say that they've been oppressed. In India, there is one organization called Persecution Relief, which actually I did read the news recently also, even in this particular case, where the cases that have been highlighted are generated by persecution relief. Persecution relief must know that you all must know that it is an NGO which keeps manufacturing these fake narratives, and then it supplies this to the United States and other international organizations. If you see all the international organizations, they've been quoting persecution relief, and persecution relief is the one which is manufacturing all these fake narratives. Unfortunately, there is the government or the police has not actually investigated or got into depth of these cases.
It's worth our audience knowing that of the 26 members of the European community, um, I think there are 24 who do not recognize Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma, as a state recognized religion. So we have a European Christian bloc of nations who do not give equality to members of the Hindu religious tradition. If you, for example, a marriage certificate in Belgium, where it says religion, our people put other. And the reasoning is that if the state recognizes the religion, they have obligations to provide funds for the religious practitioners to be able to freely practice their religions. So this is overt and outright discrimination being practiced right in their own backyards, and yet they do this shamelessly.
Namaste and welcome to Media's Current Affairs Show. I'm Shreya Agarwal, a lawyer and journalist, and your host for today's talk. Since 2014, a narrative of religious intolerance in India has flooded the global and national media, with so many alleged instances of communal violence having been reported across newspapers. On these very lines, a petition was moved in the Supreme Court of India alleging instances of Christian persecution and police partiality in handling such matters. The plea, filed by one Reverend Dr. Peter Machado of National Solidarity Forum, Reverend Vijay Lal of Evangelical Fellowship of India, and others, alleges instances of communal violence against members of the Christian community. Although these matters fall in the purview of the local state police, alleging partiality, the reverends have asked the court for setting up of special investigation teams with officers from outside the states to conduct regular police duties like registering an FIR, conducting investigation, etc. They have asked for compensation for damage to property in such instances, and even for each state to provide police protection for prayer meetings. Dissing these claims in preliminary objections, the central government has told the court that there is a serious discrepancy in the facts alleged in the petition, and that a preliminary assessment has revealed that the petitioners have resorted to falsehood and relied on cherry picked, self serving documents like news reports. Further, that about 162 incidents were not truthfully recorded, and the remaining 139 were either false or deliberately projected wrongfully as instances of targeted violence against Christians, and that even instances of purely criminal nature, those arising from personal issues or those that were complaints or accusations made against Christians, were being shown as communal persecution. All in all, it has been emphasized by the government that it has been seen that in any alleged crime, wherein the victim practiced a particular religion, the media reports have sought to assume a communal reason behind the same without even ascertaining basic facts. To discuss this interplay of alleged communal violence in Bharat, the role of the media in portraying such cases, and the efficiency of our own systems in dealing with such cases, and much more, we have two very special guests joining us today. Please join me in welcoming the erudite Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji and Jeremy Anthony ji. Satish ji is a British Hindu leader, a scholar, an author, and many other things besides. Jerome Anto is a prominent member of the Sanatani Christian community. He pursues the agenda of Hindu human rights with great passion and courage. So, I'm now going to begin with my questions. What are your initial views on the issue of media misreporting such instances to lend a communal color to the matter? Did such cases not happen as much before 2014, or were they not reported as much, or are they being misreported now?
Thank you so much, Shreya ji, for inviting me on your show. This is a very important topic, very dear to my heart, and I take pleasure in telling the facts and figures and the ground reality. This is not a new phenomenon, especially in India. Whenever there is some kind of a Hindu awakening, when I said Hindu awakening, it is not oppression, it is defense. Whenever there is some kind of a narrative which is posted anti Christian, there is some kind of a defense that comes in. The, the whole ecosystem of the minorities wakes up to say that they've been oppressed. Let me give you an example. If you look at all these narratives, whatever they have been peddling for so many years, uh, these are cases which are hollow in nature. They come in sporadic situations. And then what happens is this: the church trumpets it, especially since being a Christian, the church trumpets it as anti minority or anti Christian. For example, I've seen so many cases where there are civil cases, criminal cases, where there are Christians involved, but it has got nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with the church. The moment such cases are picked up and somebody defends those cases, then it becomes a communal case. It is branded as a communal case. So this is not true in terms of persecution. There is a whole machinery that is working behind it. Thankfully, there is a petition that is gone from the church, headed by, in this case, by the Bishop Peter Machado, and the Supreme Court has, and the government has responded. This should have come many years back because there is no depth in any of these cases. These are cases which are very hollow, and this should have been investigated and actually taken head on the moment it propelled to national and international media.
What are your views on the matter, Panditji?
Pranamji, Jai Shri Ram. Thank you so much for asking me to speak with Jeromji and to share a stance and a platform with Jeromji on this issue. I've been admiring his work for many years, and his attention to detail, his determination to root out the truth is something that I've always found inspiration. So I'm really pleased that you're speaking to this particular issue. Um, Shreya, I would agree with some of what has already been said. Let me just emphasize that this whole spectre of intolerance, it, it can be traced to 2014. A period of maybe a few months was all that was granted to the BJP when they took office and Prime Minister Modi when they took office. And I remember there was a lull, there was a quietude, almost as though the world was waiting to see what is this Hindu origin leader going to do with the nation. And in that lull, it was almost like any action was being monitored. within a few months, what happened was a tsunami was unleashed, a tsunami of allegations, of that old myth of Christian persecution. And I say old because it's been around for a long period of time. There is a body of study which has already analyzed this and concluded that this myth of Christian persecution is a strategy as opposed to fact. I think in history, the year 303 to the year 305 under Emperor Diocletian were the only years in which Christians were targeted and persecuted for being Christians. And 2 years of targeting, and not in particularly large numbers, doesn't justify a 2,000-year Christian um, persecution complex. We have to scrutinize the historical aspects and antecedents of this approach. I am delighted. I'm absolutely delighted that this is now being put in front of the judiciary. We have the opportunity for legal minds to address the reality and the veracity of this case. Is it mischievous prosecution? Is it a maliciously motivated litigation? These things must be determined. And if the court does determine that it is, it will set a wonderful precedent that such malicious litigation must not be brought. This, I think, would be a watershed moment. I'm hoping that the genuine protectors and the voices of equality, of religious freedoms, and the freedom of thought and the freedom of expression all step up and recognize that this is an important time in history and defend those principles. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I'm following it with a great deal of interest.
Right. So, Satishji, you do what we can conclude from what you've just shared with us is that the media has played its own role in unleashing this barrage of reports since 2014, especially about Christian persecution and persecution of minorities, the global and the Indian media, right?
Yes, in fact, it's lifted a rock, and I think from out of this rock we are going to see many, many scorpions crawling. We're going to see a great deal of, shall we say, hidden strategy being given scrutiny under the glare of the sun. Remember, there is only one Hindu indigenous civilization, and I use the word Hindu as it's used in the Constitution. There is only one civilization, one nation, which has the, shall we say, where this ideology, this way of looking at the world, this entirely dharmic perspective on existence exists. There are 57, I think, at the last count, nations which have state sanctioned protection for an Islamist ideology. And we have over 117 which have Christianist ideologies. So Hindus and the indigenous people of Bharat are in the minority. And yet, all of a sudden, the global, shall we say, the global gathering of those who signal these virtues, they seem to have an inordinate degree of trouble and difficulty and discomfort when a Hindu group stands up and says, actually, our rights also need to be protected. So this is really going to bring a lot of other things into the frame. And I really hope that we can take advantage of this moment in history.
Right. Um, Jerome ji, my next question is for you. That what has your personal experience been in cases where different communities are involved, and how have you seen the police respond to interfaith disputes in Bharat?
Being a citizen of this proud nation, what I've observed all through my life is this. Right from the constitution, the way constitution is built, it is purely pro minority. uh, the minorities, especially the two Abrahamic religion, have milked adequately from the constitution because it's purely the constitution is pro minorities. If you look at the right to religion, uh, it actually gives a second hand treatment to the Hindus. In fact, I've been championing the idea of re-looking at the whole right to religion context and the whole gamut of how it is being built, the privileges that have been given to the minorities. And the minorities, especially these two minorities, have thrived and thrived on the bed of persecution, on the bed of victimhood. if you observe any of these, in the cases of these two minorities, especially if there is some kind of a case that goes to the police or to the judiciary, I think they've been given a much better pedestal to be accommodated, to be heard, and to be scrutinized. Now, when I come to these kind of persecution cases which have been trumpeted in the media, both India and in the international media, what I wish to enlighten everybody is this: these are half baked cases. These are cases which are not persecution, but they've been used, camouflaged, they've been molded to be cases of persecution. Also, what needs to be understood is this: I can give you specific cases where it has been called out in the media, and the politicians have sang a song of Christian persecution, but it doesn't linger. Because why it doesn't linger is this: because when the police actually investigates these cases, there is no communal angle in it. Let me give you throw an additional light. For example, Mangalore in Karnataka is a state where there is a lot of talk about persecution that happens. I remember a very specific case which stole the limelight of both India and in the international media, where it was, if not one, at least a couple of cases. One such case is this, where it was alleged that a window pane of a church was broken. Because of a window pane of a church was broken, it was alleged by the whole church, and the politicians joined to condemn that this was an act of communal violence. But later on, when it was investigated, it was understood, it came to the notice of the public and the politicians and the police and everybody, that certain children were playing cricket and the ball had hit the window pane and the glass had broken. Now, the initial damage was done. After that, nobody investigated it. Nobody actually went back to the media to clarify it. Like that, there have been several instances which are cases which are hollow, half-baked information, which is actually peddled well. I also wish to add to this: there is a well-oiled machinery both in India as well as especially in the United States. In India, there is one organization called Persecution Relief, which actually I did read the news recently also, even in this particular case, where the cases that have been highlighted are generated by Persecution Relief. Persecution Relief must know that, you all must know that it is an NGO which keeps manufacturing these fake narratives, and then it supplies this to the United States and other international organizations. If you see all the international organizations, they've been quoting Persecution Relief, and Persecution Relief is the one which is manufacturing all these fake narratives. Unfortunately, there is the government or the police has not actually investigated or got into depth of these cases. So, as far as the administration is concerned, I think we as Christians or we as minorities have any day a better chance to stand up and ask, and we've been heard more than one. The reason there is no action is this: because these are hollow, debunked cases.
I think, I mean, on those same lines, what we have also, what we've also observed is that in the present petition, it has been cited that there has been an instance where one a particular case has been wrongly cited as a case of Christian persecution, by saying that the victims were being, or the complainants were being forced to celebrate Diwali, whereas when the police investigated the matter, it was found that it was not any religion related issue at all. It was a private dispute between both the parties, where both the parties had filed counter cases against each other. So, yeah, I mean, just going on the same lines, uh, my next question is again, on the same lines, that how do you think the Indian judiciary can maintain neutrality while deciding such cases? Because as Jerome ji has pointed out, Panditji, that there has been uh, until 2014 or even beyond that, there has been a general trend in the Indian judiciary uh, to not take a very neutral view in matters where interfaith disputes are concerned.
Mm.
For instance, uh, yes, Satish.
I was going to say that what Jeromji said has brought a very interesting aspect to this conversation. This idea has always troubled me that minorities are automatically victims and that majorities are automatically oppressors. This is part of our colonial conditioning, shall we say. You know, I always gently emphasize to people that the British were a minority when they came to Bharat. They were a particularly toxic minority. And I think we need to start to look at the toxicity of the denomination and the demographic rather than its numbers. You know, we have minorities in Bharat who are unbelievably integrated and fully supportive and fully engaged with the nation and its well being. And so they claim no minority oppression or anything like that at all. Um, Whereas, on the other hand, like the British, like I said, the Anglican Christians were one of the most toxic minorities ever to have come over to Bharat. The Nazis were a toxic minority. And look at the damage and the harm they wreaked across Europe. So, minority status does not automatically convey the, shall we say, the moral high ground. It's the actions and the history over a period of time which will determine that. So the moment somebody says minority, we should actually discard it. We should recognize that minority and the importance given to minority in the Constitution is actually an act of discrimination in and of itself. It's a prejudice. It enshrines a prejudice against the indigenous people of Bharat in the Constitution. And when that happens, when you have such an enshrinement, it's actually a state of apartheid. In South Africa, they had apartheid on the basis of racial origin, and it was enshrined, the prejudice was enshrined in the laws and the manner in which the country conducted its affairs. It's not unfair to say that the indigenous people of Bharat, especially the Hindus, are existing in a state which conforms to the description of religious apartheid. This is how crystal clear it should be. So let's dispense with this notion of minority oppression and victimhood and majority aggression. It's a lie. It's one of those lies that have been perpetuated by those who seek to harm Bharat. One other thing that Jerome's comments reminded me of is in 2007, the United Nations passed a declaration. It's the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And if I can just read for you, Article 8 excuse me, of that declaration says Indigenous peoples have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation or destruction of their culture, and that states have to provide effective mechanisms for prevention of and redress for any action which has the aim of depriving them of their integrity as distinct peoples or of their cultural values or ethnic identities. Indeed, states are required to offer protection against any action which has the aim or effect of dispossessing them of their lands, territories, and resources. This is the United Nations Declaration. And when you have a look at the allegations that are being leveled against Bharat, when you look at the prejudices which are institutionally enshrined and judicially enshrined, I think we now have the opportunity to use the United Nations charters to address these. And this particular case gives us a wonderful opportunity to articulate these principles in front of a court of law.
Right. So, Panditji, would you say that the protection, or Jerome ji, would you in fact say that the protection which has been ensured to the minorities within the Indian Constitution is now being used, or has been used, unfortunately so, to perpetuate reverse discrimination, maybe?
See, this the whole right to religion is actually a sort of license for the minorities to seek preferential treatment. And I think to a large extent, there is some kind of an awakening that has happened since 2014. People have started realizing there is a leadership. We can rule ourselves, we can be independent, and we can become powerful, we can become strong, that the external world is unable to digest, and that the channel the arm twisting of Bharat uh, is some kind of a way of enslaving us, telling us that we are still second rate people on the face of the earth. Not to mention the global community is unable to digest that we are strong. Let me bring to your notice that the word persecution has long been used by Christians right from the earlier from the time of Jesus, to actually further the agenda of annexation of indigenous people. Whenever the indigenous people spoke about the oppressions of these Abrahamic religions, the only song they sang was victimhood and persecution. I also wish to add some a very important thought-provoking point in this context, especially in the context of India. I hope everybody realizes and remembers and does not forget that Prime Minister Modi, while he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he was banned from entering the United States. Has anybody ever investigated why was he banned? Was it just because of media reports? What was the reason? Imagine banning a person entering the United States. Many people do not know, but this was the handiwork of a lobby which is sitting in the United States. The lobby which is built up of Christian evangelicals. And these are not Westerners, these are Indian Christian evangelicals who are sitting in the United States and Europe, who are lobbying to put pressure on India so that the act of conversion can be continued meticulously. I also wish to bring to everybody's notice that India has been declared as the 10th most dangerous place for Christians to live. We were number 28, now we are number 10. And that puts us in the league of nations like South Korea, Saudi Arabia, North Korea. Can you believe it? While we Christians and the Abrahamics and the minorities are having a field time in this nation, this is what the evangelicals are capable enough to to put a blame on our nation. And let us also understand that this lobby which brought India shame has the power to influence the Congress of the US in the US. And by branding India as the 10th most dangerous place for Christians to live, it actually promotes or gives the United States the liberty to influence and impose economic sanctions on this nation. There is much larger conspiracy that is going around right under our feet. We are not aware of it. Thankfully this has come, and I wish this government pursues this case and actually exposes the whole conspiracy. And I've been talking about it for the last few years. This conspiracy, I think we have reached a crescendo, and we need to expose this conspiracy. And I think a befitting reply would be to the case that has been registered by the church with the Supreme Court. There is no better befitting reply that we can give an answer for our people about the conspiracy.
Yes, Panditji,
Gee,
your views.
if I can just pick up on what Jerome G said about this report, where Britain, I think it was the Open Doors report produced by the parliamentary group in the United Kingdom, where they've included Bharat as being number 10. Um, we have very interesting conversations with some of the parliamentarians who do this work. It's worth our audience knowing that of the 26 members of the European community, um, I think there are 24 who do not recognize Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma, as a state recognized religion. So we have a European Christian bloc of nations who do not give equality to members of the Hindu religious tradition. If you, for example, a marriage certificate in Belgium where it says religion, our people put other. And the reasoning is that if the state recognizes the religion, they have obligations to provide funds for the religious practitioners to be able to freely practice their religions. So this is overt and outright discrimination being practiced right in their own backyards, and yet they do this shamelessly. One of the other things that I think is really worth remembering now, and that is we are seeing um, a nexus between the opposition parties in Bharat as their credibility dissipates, as their incompetence and nepotism and dynastic discrimination becomes such a heavy burden for them and they disappear. Their unpleasantness and their cunning and their desire to do harm to the nation seems to be increasing. Jeromji, you mentioned that Prime Minister Modiji was banned. I can share a little bit of information with you. When our Home Secretary, she was just a parliamentarian at that time, Priti Patel, she visited Chief Minister Modiji in Gujarat on a trade mission. And that's when we first discovered that there was a ban in place. Further research brought to light the fact that the instruction and the request for the ban actually emerged from an opposition political party in Bharat, and it won't take too much to guess which one it was. And so the Labour Party, which was in government at that time, they're the ones who instituted the ban first and foremost. And that set the dominoes tumbling. The United States was then able to leverage that. And there is a definite outsourcing of political hate propaganda that's now visible. And its roots, I think, are also shared by the opposition parties in Bharat.
Uh, about that, Panditji, I would like to ask you that do you think that this outsourcing of hate political propaganda was it always in place, or is it a recent phenomenon?
There is something called the International Socialists Pact, and the Congress Party in India and the Labour Party in the United Kingdom are both signatories to this. Um, David Miliband, brother of Ed Miliband, former leader of the Labour Party. There are photographs on record, we have records as well, of him visiting Amity and doing, shall we say, political sloganeering and campaigning for Rahul Gandhi. So, what on earth would take somebody like David Miliband to Amity? This is an old relationship. The thing is that now, because they're desperate, their hand is being revealed on a daily basis. The response to it, though, is important. I'm reminded of that famous boxing match with Muhammad Ali, where he stood on the side of the ropes, taking a pummeling and a beating and a beating. And each time he'd come back and say, I'm still here. But the beating didn't stop until he responded. And he responded in a manner which defeated the enemy. And our Bharatiya government has a reputation for the first part of that particular policy or strategy, in that we take a beating again and again and again, and we're still here, but we're bruised and we're injured. And I think what Jerome G said is that a robust response is required. And this case is the opportunity for that robust response. We need to draw a line in the sand. A precedent needs to be established that there are consequences of creating civil discord and strife and friction between communities as a result of political propaganda and hate speech generation. There must be consequences, otherwise it's going to increase. Between now and 2024, we will see a deluge. Compared to what has already gone in the past, we are going to see a global campaign to defame Hindus, to elevate us to the hated status of the Nazis, for example. We're already seeing allegations of fascism and all sorts of nonsense. Um, and the partial vision which completely ignores the fact that Bharat is the first democracy. We're the largest democracy, and Prime Minister Modi ji has had the democratic mandate, the largest democratic mandate in the history of democracy, twice has been granted to him. On the other hand, we have the United States, whose electoral system seems to be more akin to a banana republic, and the United Kingdom. Who is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? There is a question mark over it. These states have not got stable political systems. We have a stable political system, and it is delivering the vision of the people of Bharat. That must be protected, and the responsibility for protecting it falls on the government of India.
Thank you so much, Panditji. I'll move on to my next question, which is that if we extend this very conversation to the other end, to other related subjects, which are also now entering the legal domain, then so religion and its practice are they're both highly very very personal matters. What are your views on recent demands for performance of prayers on public streets? And in the present petition, there has been a prayer made before the Supreme Court for police protection for performing prayers. What are your views on that?
I have a very straightforward opinion about such matters. Firstly, we supposedly Bharat is a secular state, and secularity means a separation between religion and state. The public space is protected, and religion should not come into the equation when looking at anything to do with the public space. So, public spaces literally should have no religious um, uh, intervention. There should be no injection of religion into public spaces. Full stop. The second thing that I look at is that in Saudi Arabia, the home of Islam, in Rome, the home of Roman Catholicism, in London, the home of Anglicanism, none of these traditions have any legitimacy granted to the right to be able to disturb the flow of life of the general public. You do not see these phenomena anywhere in the world except in India, and therefore we must look at it as a localized phenomenon. If we look at it as a localized phenomenon, it is nothing other than disrupting the harmonious right to conduct one's business, to travel freely without hindrance, which every citizen should enjoy. So there should be zero tolerance of it. And the the approach of then claiming victimhood, we've already addressed the use of victimhood as a means of garnering and weaponizing another person's compassion against their own interests. So that's I don't have any confusion over that, and I don't think the legal machinery should be confused in any way, shape, or form either. We say Lady Jurisprudence. She has a blindfold, and she has a blindfold because she is not supposed to take note of individual characteristics of the person in front of her. She is supposed to apply the law with equality and equanimity, completely blind to their identity related issues. And so, I'm sorry, I don't think there is any justification for interfering in public spaces whatsoever.
Correct. And what are your views on this, Jerome ji?
Mm, strangely, the factors, this has become an exhibition of a kind of uh, what do you say, taunting the majority. This is common with both the Abrahamic religions in India, using public places to display religion is a kind of uh, I would say is taunting the society. It is actually, it's a very menacing is from a religious point of view, this is a very menacing act, where religion, as we say, is private. Then it has to be private, it has to be within our homes or within our places, designated places. But I would like to bring to your notice that today it is no more in designated places. it has become, these kind of display has become very prominent and in a very open spaces. For example, in deep into residential areas, residential places where people reside, and without a logic, without there being any kind of logic, these mushrooming of such kind of exhibition is becoming very prevalent in our nation. For example, why do you have a religious, for example, if I say a religious place, for example, if it is a church, why would you have a church? I am being very diplomatic by saying church. You would have a church in a place where there are Christians. But today, these kind of religious places are being inserted in places where there are no Christians. So, what does it actually mean? There's a very, very hidden, deep communication. This, I think, all of us need to take cognizance. It's a kind of messaging. It is a pure messaging for all of us. And if we do not take a notice of this, it is going to be very detrimental. It is not a very innocent act. Please understand, these are, there is a method to the, I would say there's a method to the madness. It is deliberately done. It is not that they do, there's no place for people to worship. The very act of exhibition is a kind of what do you call that, taunting the rest of the public.
Right.
Yeah, if I could expand on that a little. Um, only, what, a short few weeks ago, we had the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Communion, in Canada apologizing for their ethnocidal history. He openly acknowledged that their attempts to violently erase the civilizational memory of people and a whole generation of young children was a terrible crime. We have the Pope in Canada doing exactly the same thing. And apparently, I was counting, and there are now over 100 apologies made by popes and archbishops across the world for the atrocities inflicted by their brethren. So these are institutions which have a history of ethnophobia, i.e., hatred of people of ethnicities which are not European, and it's part of the institutional way of functioning. But they also have a record of very recent ethnocide. In Bharat, it is ongoing, it is happening right now. And it's a policy, isn't it? At the beginning, it is the love of Jesus. And at the end, it is the pious, hand-wringing apology for devastation on a scale which can never be rectified, but accompanied with no support and no funds. There is never any reparation, there is never any restitution. This is the nature of the institutions that we're dealing with. And the recent example that springs to my mind was of that poor radicalized young Christian boy who took a boat and tried to land on the Sentinelese Islands against law, against governmental decisions. There was it's a sacred space. He was not supposed to be going there, and yet he was feeling confident and empowered enough to insert himself, to penetrate into an area where he had no right to be. This deliberate pushing of the boundaries, transgressing across boundaries, is a fundamental part of proselytization strategy. It should be recognized as such, and we have to have the state complying with the obligations that it undertook to protect its indigenous traditions under the United Nations resolutions. So there should be zero tolerance of this continuous expansionism, and as Jerome G so rightly said, there should be zero tolerance of this taunting of the indigenous peoples, not only of Bharat, but of every other First Nations, Africa, Australia. It's exactly the same phenomenon. So I think this case that's been presented represents an opportunity for drawing a line under many of these issues and establishing a good, robust precedent, one which will actually support better inter-community harmony.
Right. Thank you so much, Satish ji and Jerome ji, for joining us today. So, across the course of our conversation, a 40-minute conversation, we have covered a lot of things, right from the fake propaganda or the fake news which is peddled out, outsourcing of international hate propaganda, which is, and as Satish ji pointed out, that it's been happening for a while now. It's not something new. Then what was shared about the pushing of boundaries, uh, the method in the madness, everything that was shared on the issue by Jerome ji and by Satish ji. It's been very, very enlightening for us and for me. And I thank both of you for taking time out to join us today. And I hope to have many more such conversations with you in the future. Chiti Media thanks you. Namaste. And thank you so much for joining us.
Jai
Thank you,
Shri Ram.
Shreya ji.
Jai
Thank
Jai
you.
Shri
Shri.
Ram.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.